You know what they say about quiet people? That we're weak, that we'll take anything, that our silence means we don't have opinions, don't have boundaries, don't have the backbone to stand up for ourselves. Well, let me tell you something about quiet people. We're not weak. We're watching. We're listening. We're remembering every single thing you think we're too meek to notice. I was sitting at my dining table, in my house, reading a book I'd been looking forward to all week. It was a Tuesday morning, peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels like a gift when you're my age. The sunlight was coming through the window just right, hitting the pages perfectly. I had my coffee, my bookmark, my reading glasses. Everything exactly where it should be. Then he walked in. My son's new husband. The one who moved into my house 6 months ago with promises about helping with expenses and being part of the family. The one who somehow forgot that this was my home the moment his boxes were unpacked. He didn't even look at me when he walked over. Just started moving my things aside. My book, my coffee, my reading glasses. Like I was some kind of obstacle in his path. The dismissal in his movements made my stomach clench, but I kept my face neutral. I've had 63 years of practice at keeping my face neutral. "You don't need this space anymore," he said, not even bothering to look up from whatever papers he was spreading across my table. "Use the spare room. I have work calls." The spare room. In my own house, I was being relegated to the spare room. The room where I keep the Christmas decorations and my late husband's tools. The room with the broken window latch and the overhead light that flickers. The rage that shot through me was so sudden, so fierce I felt it in my teeth. 63 years old and I was being dismissed like a child who didn't know her place. In the house I've been paying for since before he was born. In the house where I raised my children, buried my husband, survived my darkest hours. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't explain that this was my house, my table, my space that I'd earned through decades of mortgage payments and property taxes and careful maintenance. I didn't tell him about the nights I laid awake wondering how I'd keep this place after my husband died. I didn't mention the sacrifices I'd made to keep this roof over our heads. Instead, I closed my book, slowly. The sound of the pages coming together was the only noise in the room. I stood up, feeling every one of my 63 years in my knees, and I gathered my things, my coffee mug, the one my daughter gave me for Mother's Day, my reading glasses, the ones I saved for 3 months to buy, my bookmark, a pressed flower from my husband's funeral arrangement. I walked out of that room without saying a single word, because sometimes silence is the loudest response you can give. But you know what really broke my heart? My son was in the kitchen, my boy, the one I raised to respect others, to stand up for what's right. He was there, pretending to be busy with his laptop, his back deliberately turned to what had just happened. When I walked past him carrying my displaced belongings, he couldn't even look at me. His own mother being humiliated in her own home, and he was suddenly very interested in his computer screen. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, no, "Hey, that's not okay." Just the sound of his fingers on the keyboard typing away like the most important work in the world was happening right there, while his mother was being treated like an unwelcome guest in her own house. That betrayal hurt worse than the disrespect, because I expected nothing from the son-in-law. He'd shown me who he was from day one, entitled, dismissive, the kind of man who thinks marriage gives him ownership over everything his spouse's family owns. But my son knew better. I raised him better. I went to the spare room, just like I was told, sat there among the Christmas boxes and the dusty photo albums, feeling smaller than I'd felt since I was a child. But then I remembered something I'd almost forgotten in the fog of trying to be accommodating, trying to be the welcoming mother, trying not to rock the boat. I remembered who I am. See, before I retired, I worked for 30 years in municipal planning, Zoning laws, building codes, property compliance, that was my world. I know things about property ownership that most people never think about. I know about tenant rights and landlord responsibilities. I know about informal occupancy and legal residency. I know exactly what paperwork matters and what promises are just air. And sitting in that spare room, surrounded by the accumulated memories of a life well lived, I realized I had something they didn't know I had: power. Legal, documented, unshakable power. I walked to my bedroom, still my sanctuary, and opened the filing cabinet where I keep all my important documents, every deed, every tax record, every insurance policy, every bank statement showing mortgage payments made from my account, and my account alone. 30 years of meticulous record keeping, because that's what you do when you're responsible for something that matters. The house was in my name. The utilities were in my name. The insurance was in my name. The property taxes came to me. Every single legal document that proved ownership had my signature and my signature alone. They were living in my house as my guests, and guests can be asked to leave. That afternoon, I put on my best coat, the navy blue one I wear to important meetings, and I walked to the small hotel downtown, not to hide, not to escape, but to think. I ordered tea in their quiet lobby and spread my documents across their little table, reviewing everything with the methodical precision of someone who spent decades making sure every detail is exactly right. I made a phone call to someone I'd worked with in property compliance, asked about the legalities of informal occupancy, asked about notice requirements for guests who'd overstayed their welcome, asked about my rights as a property owner to reclaim my own space. The answers were exactly what I expected, and more empowering than they probably realized. The next morning, I made some changes. Quiet changes. I removed their names from the household accounts they'd somehow gotten added to. The streaming services, the delivery subscriptions, the grocery store membership. I changed the garage door code and removed their cars from the driveway parking permit. I contacted the post office and clarified that mail delivery was authorized for me only. I didn't cut off utilities. I'm not cruel. But I made it very clear who was responsible for this house and who was merely a guest in it. The phone calls started that afternoon. Confused texts, missed calls that I didn't return, messages about misunderstandings and requests to talk this out. My son's voice getting more panicked with each voicemail, finally understanding that his mother wasn't the pushover he'd assumed she was. I responded once, one text message. "We need to meet with a mediator to discuss the current living arrangements. I'll arrange it, that's all." The mediation meeting was set for the following week in a neutral municipal office with a third-party official present. I brought my folder of documents, the thick one, organized with tabs and page protectors, the kind of documentation that leaves no room for argument. They brought excuses. Sitting across from me at that conference table, they tried to explain how they'd actually been helping me, how they'd been saving me money by taking over some of the household expenses, how they thought this arrangement was better for everyone. I spread the bank statements across the table. My mortgage payments, made from my account every month for 30 years. My property tax payments, my insurance premiums, my utility bills, the receipts for every major repair and improvement made to the house. Then I asked them to show me their contributions, their lease agreement, their rent payments, any legal document that gave them claim to my space. The silence was deafening. The mediator looked at the paperwork and then looked at them. "Ma'am," she said to me, "this appears to be your property entirely. Are you asking these individuals to vacate?" "I'm asking them to respect that this is my home," I said. "I'm not running a free boarding house for adults who can't be bothered to treat me with basic courtesy in my own space." My son started to speak. Something about family and love and working things out. I held up my hand. "This isn't punishment," I said, looking directly at him. "This is me reclaiming responsibility. You forgot that respect isn't..." negotiable, even from family, especially from family. They had 30 days to find other arrangements, 30 days to remember that kindness isn't the same as weakness, and hospitality isn't the same as entitlement. After they left, I went home and reclaimed my space. I cleared my dining table of their papers and their assumptions. I adjusted the lighting back to how I liked it. I reorganized my kitchen shelves, removing the clutter they'd accumulated, the conveniences they'd claimed without asking. I sat down at my table with my book, my coffee, my reading glasses, and I read in the quiet I'd earned. The anger is still there. The hurt from my son's betrayal still sits heavy in my chest. But there's something else there too, something I'd forgotten I had: self-respect. The knowledge that I don't have to accept disrespect just because someone shares my DNA or lives under my roof. Since then, I've started talking to friends, neighbors, other women who've found themselves in similar situations, women who've been made to feel like guests in their own lives. I share what I learned about property rights, about the importance of keeping your own name on your own assets, about the difference between helping family and enabling entitled behavior. I've learned that my story isn't unique. There are too many of us who've been taught that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity. Too many of us who've been told that loving our children means accepting whatever they dish out. Too many of us who've forgotten that respect flows both ways, regardless of age or relationship. But here's what I want every woman my age to know. You don't have to accept unacceptable behavior just because someone calls it love. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to shrink yourself to make room for people who won't even acknowledge your worth. My son calls now, more respectfully. We're rebuilding our relationship on terms that honor both of us. His husband has learned that charm doesn't work on someone who values substance. They found a nice apartment across town, a place where they can make their own rules and pay their own bills. And me? I'm back at my dining table, reading my books, drinking my coffee in the sunlight that streams through my windows in my house that I earned through decades of hard work and careful planning. I never raised my voice through any of this, but I raised my standards. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept what you know you don't deserve. Sometimes the quietest revolution is the one that happens when you finally remember your own worth. I'm 63 years old and I'm just getting started.